All right, let's jump into our deep dive today. We're tackling something a little different. This time, we're going to be exploring Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's 1927 speech on budget. One, yeah, I know the title might not scream exciting, but trust me on this one.
It's actually way more interesting than it sounds. See, this isn't the Ambedkar we typically think of,
Yeah.
the one who drafted the Indian Constitution. This is an earlier Ambedkar, still finding his voice,
Yeah.
but already incredibly sharp and passionate.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because this speech, his very first address to the Bombay Legislative Council, dives right into the nitty-gritty of the budget. But there's a deeper layer here, right? Like, why choose this topic for his debut?
Well, he was making a statement. You got to remember the context. India, under British rule, the council, while a step towards self-governance, had limited power over finances. And here's Ambedkar, a nominated member, not even elected, choosing to focus on the budget. It was a strategic move.
So he's not just talking about numbers, he's using the budget to expose something bigger.
Exactly. Ambedkar understood that budgets are more than just spreadsheets. They're a reflection of a government's priorities, its values. And by dissecting the budget, he could reveal who held the real power and whose needs were being met.
And whose needs were being ignored, right? I mean, right off the bat, he points out this glaring issue. The council couldn't even control a huge chunk of the budget. Over a third of spending was decided by the executive branch, appointed by the British. And then there's the revenue from land and excise taxes. Again, no control.
It's like he's saying, hey, if we're supposed to represent the people, how can we do that when we don't even control how their money is spent? It's a bold move, especially for someone just starting out in politics.
Totally. It's like he's exposing the limitations of the council's power, highlighting the gap between the ideal of self-governance and the reality of British control.
Yeah, and he doesn't stop there. Ambedkar then dives into specific examples to show what he sees as government mismanagement. Like he brings up the case of forest revenue, which had basically flatlined despite increased spending.
I'm guessing he didn't see that as just a simple accounting error.
Not at all.
Yeah.
This is classic Ambedkar. He uses concrete data points to highlight deeper systemic issues. For him, the stagnant forest revenue wasn't just about inefficient forestry practices. It was a symptom of a broader problem,
Which was?
a bloated and inefficient
More of it.
bureaucracy.
Oh, I see. So he's saying that this top-heavy administration, all those layers of officials, was actually draining resources that could have been used elsewhere.
Think about it. This is 1927 India, widespread poverty, limited resources, and you've got this massive administrative machine, a holdover from the colonial system, just gobbling up funds.
And he backs up this claim, right? It's not just a hunch. He's actually digging into the budget numbers.
Absolutely. Ambedkar meticulously analyzes the budget, going through it line by line, year by year. And what he finds is this troubling trend. The Bombay presidency is moving from a surplus to a growing deficit.
Yikes. So he's basically saying, folks, we're spending more than we're taking in, and this isn't sustainable. And remember, this is decades before deficit spending became mainstream economic theory. He was ahead of his time.
He was sounding the alarm bells, warning about the long-term consequences of this kind of short-sighted financial management.
So he's not just criticizing, he's offering an alternative vision.
Exactly. Ambedkar's advocating for long-term financial planning, for a more strategic approach that considers the future well-being of the people.
He's basically saying, let's stop kicking the can down the road and start making responsible choices about our finances. Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, what did he do?
He turns his attention to three major commitments the government had made: loan repayments, the introduction of universal primary education, and this really controversial policy of prohibition.
Okay, I see where this is going. Ambedkar's about to lay down some truth bombs.
You could say that he acknowledges that these are all worthy goals, but...
But they come with a hefty price tag.
Exactly. He knew you can't just promise the world without figuring out how to pay for it. And that leads us to one of the most politically charged aspects of his speech: taxation.
Oh yeah, the dreaded two-word.
He drops this bomb on the council, and you can just imagine how that went down.
I bet not everyone was thrilled, especially considering the already strained financial situation.
So we've got this backdrop of a ballooning deficit, these ambitious social programs, and then Ambedkar brings up taxes. It's a recipe for some serious drama.
And it's a reminder that even something as seemingly dry as a budget can be a battleground for social change. But that's a conversation for the next part of our deep dive. Ambedkar, he doesn't just drop the tax bomb and walk away. He actually reminds the council that they DO have the power to raise taxes.
Okay, so he's acknowledging their authority, but also...
But there's a catch, right? It's the government's responsibility to actually propose the taxes.
So he's highlighting this kind of procedural roadblock.
Exactly. Ambedkar's not letting them off the hook. He's basically saying, look, you have all this data from the Taxation Inquiry Committee. You know the state of our finances. Where's the plan?
So it's like a clever tactical move, right? He's forcing the government to confront this issue head on.
Yeah. He's saying you can't just talk about these lofty goals, these social programs, without addressing the elephant in the room. How are we going to pay for it all?
Makes you think about how often that happens, even today, right? Big promises, but the details of how to fund them, well, those get swept under the rug.
All the time. Ambedkar's insight is that you can't have one without the other. You want social progress. You need a solid financial plan.
And it's even more impressive when you remember the context, right? This is India under British rule, a young Indian leader challenging the financial policies of a colonial power.
It takes cuts. And it shows how deeply Ambedkar believed in the power of representation. True representation to him wasn't just about having a voice. It was about having the power to shape policies that directly impacted people's lives.
So listening to this speech, it's about way more than just budgets and taxes. It's about this bigger fight for self-determination, for equality.
Absolutely. And Ambedkar understood that financial decisions have real human consequences. These aren't just numbers on a balance sheet. They're about people's lives, their well-being, their access to opportunities.
It's like he's forcing us to look beyond those dry technicalities and see the budget for what it really is, a moral document.
Exactly. A reflection of a society's values.
Now, one thing that really stood out to me was how Ambedkar tackles this issue of prohibition. It was such a controversial policy at the time, and his stance on it, well, it reveals a lot about his pragmatism.
Oh, yeah. Prohibition.
Yeah.
The banning of alcohol. A really complex issue, right? Lots of moral and social dimensions.
And Ambedkar didn't shy away from that complexity. He recognized the arguments in favor of prohibition, but he also pointed out the potential downsides, especially when it came to government revenue.
The excise tax on alcohol, that was a big source of income for the government. And losing that without a clear alternative could have serious consequences.
So even though he understood the moral arguments, he was also grounded in the economic realities. He was basically saying, we can't just ignore the financial side of this.
It's a great example of his balanced approach, right? Deeply principled, but also pragmatic. He knew that progress often requires compromise.
It's a lesson we could all learn from, I think, especially today. In a world with such complex problems, it's tempting to search for simple solutions.
But Ambedkar reminds us that the best solutions are often the ones that acknowledge the nuances, that embrace the complexities.
It's about finding that sweet spot between idealism and pragmatism, holding on to those big goals while being realistic about how to achieve them. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. This speech, delivered back in 1927 during colonial rule, still feels so relevant today.
It speaks to the power of Ambedkar's vision. His call for responsible governance, for a budget that truly reflects people's needs, that's something that transcends time and place.
It's like he's reminding us that the fight for social justice isn't limited to protests and legislation. It also plays out in the realm of economics.
Right. Making sure everyone has a fair shot, not just a select few. And budgets, they're a powerful tool in that fight.
They reveal a lot about a society's values, don't they? Where the priorities lie.
Exactly. Budgets determine who benefits from government policies. And unfortunately, who gets left behind fact. Ambedkar understood this deeply. He fought for a budget that served everyone, not just the privileged few.
One thing that really struck me was how he connects these seemingly separate issues. Like he shows how financial decisions have real human consequences.
It's not just about numbers in a spreadsheet, right? It's about people's lives, their well-being.
Exactly. Their opportunities. He makes us look beyond those cold, hard figures and consider the bigger picture.
It's like he's saying, don't get lost in the technical details. Remember that every single budget allocation, it represents a choice, a decision that affects real people.
Makes you think, huh? About the choices being made right now in our own communities.
It all comes back to us, right? What kind of society do we want to live in? Are our budgets aligned with those values?
Such powerful questions. And honestly, they're questions we should be asking ourselves all the time.
That's Ambedkar's legacy, isn't it? He challenges us to be active participants, to demand better from our leaders, to not just accept things as they are.
This deep dive into On Budget 1, I gotta admit, I wasn't sure what to expect at first. But wow, it's been eye-opening.
It might seem like a dry topic, but as we've seen, there's so much depth to it, so many insights that still resonate today.
I hope everyone listening will check out the speech for themselves, really dig into it. It's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.
And remember, budgets, they're more than just numbers. They're a reflection of our values, our priorities, the kind of world we want to create.